Okay, we're back. Sort of. Let me know in the chat if the video and audio are all right. Okay, good. Sounds like we are up and running. So, how's everybody doing? It's been it's been an interesting couple of weeks, if I'm being honest. Hopefully everybody's got their coffee. I weirdly feel out of practice a little bit on making videos, mainly because I haven't made one since Christmas, since the end of December. And for New Year's, there was a marathon video and then fires. And the fires, uh, while they initially did not really seem like they were going to impact us very much, despite there being one very close to us, like a couple blocks from us, that they managed to put out pretty quickly, mainly because that same area had burned a few months ago, so there wasn't a lot of fuel for the fire. Um, but the Palisades fire, while not very close to us in the beginning, became much closer to us as the week went on. And and truth be told, the air quality in Los Angeles with the Palisades fire and the Eaton fire all kind of pushing towards where we are made made it seem like it was sort of inevitable that the fires would reach us. And in the end, the winds changed direction and started to push the fires back towards the coast and away from us. Um, Although it was roughly about 2.5 miles from us, when we decided that we should probably pack up some things and get ready to evacuate if it came down to it. But all of that said, the 24/7 news coverage about the fires kind of made it hard to really focus on doing anything. And the air quality was bad, although you couldn't really smell the smoke, but there's definitely something in the air that really like agitates your eyes and throat and sinuses. It's not great. And depending on where you stand in all of this, there's probably pretty likely that there's a bunch of weird stuff that's not really accounted for in the air quality index reporting. And so while it may say that the air quality is good, it just means that certain particulates that they're looking for are not present in the air, but doesn't account for some of the other stuff. Um, that said, it's made making videos a little bit more challenging because the time spent outside is really reduced to either just, you know, being out there, um, in a respirator or even in a, N95 face mask. It's just really uncomfortable, particularly the respirator, which seems a lot better than the other masks. Um, but all that said, this week I started working on a new video, which will come out next week. But it just, time got away from me, and the fact that I was taking so many breaks just to come inside and give my face a rest because the pressure of having a respirator on all day is just like it's something else if you're not really used to it. And in my case, I'm not. And so I got a little bit behind. I am, however, happy to report that the Palisades fire, which is the one closest to us, is at 43% containment as of this morning. Um, you can't see the smoke or really any signs of it, honestly, from this side of the mountains, which is great for us, terrible for the people that are still impacted by the fire and for the firefighters. Um, but it does mean that things can kind of start to get a bit more back to normal on my end. So that's good. Um, and speaking of the fires, excuse me. So I was contacted by Mike Forrester, who is known as Hondo Supply on Instagram. Um, Mike, for the past few years, has been doing different charity events with makers in the Star Wars community. Most recently, this past holiday season, he did one of ornaments, Christmas ornaments, and I was a part of that. And he reached out to me the other day to talk about uh, a charity event that he's organizing that would support the World Central Kitchen, the California Fire Association, and the Pasadena Humane Society. And they're calling it LA Strikes Back. And essentially, the project is a bunch of makers and musicians are getting together to make like first responder and firefighter themed Star Wars helmets. And these will be auctioned off, and the proceeds will go to those three charities. So that's kind of an interesting way to kick off the year. Not something I was really expecting to have to do. I mean, fires are always a concern um, in Southern California. It's super dry here. Apparently, it is the driest start to a year since they started tracking rainfall, which is not great. Um, but it's been really interesting to do these charity events, and Mike and everyone else that's involved um, are just super talented, and the fact that they are taking their time and um, spending it to get funds in the hands of people that need it during a time of such widespread devastation um, is really great. And I'm honored to be a part of it. Oh, I just see a super chat come through. Thank you, Alina. Um, so yeah, so that will be an upcoming video. I'm actually getting a helmet dropped off to me tomorrow. Um, so that should be fun. I haven't really thought about what I'll do to it to make it sort of themed. Um, but it should be interesting, and hopefully it'll be something that you guys will like watching. I know it's such a mix of um, Halloween and Star Wars and pop culture and whatnot on this channel, and I appreciate your guys' willingness to just sort of let me play in the different sandboxes that I'm interested in at the different times of the year. So thank you for that. Um, Something else that I will be working on this year with my buddy Brian from the Smuggler's Room. Actually, there's two things. The first is that he and I are doing sort of a friendly maker challenge. Um, we both picked up the Home Depot Stormtrooper animatronics that they were selling this year, and we're both going to do kind of a modify, stylize, upgrade, um, friendly challenge uh, in the future. We haven't really set a date for it yet. I know his schedule is pretty crazy, and with everything that's been going on here, it's kind of hard to lock things into a schedule at this point. So that is something that is upcoming, especially since there's just so many different things that could really be done, both from a technological standpoint, as well as just costuming. So that should be interesting. And then the second thing that I will be doing with Brian, along with a bunch of other makers whose names I can't tell you about quite yet, is that Brian came up with kind of a fun idea to modify your shop vac into some kind of droid. And a lot of shop vacs kind of already have sort of a, if you squint your eyes, they kind of look like robots anyways. And he thought it would sort of be a fun idea to push that even further and to see what kind of droid shapes people could come up with. And so he and I and a handful of other makers that you probably know from YouTube will be kind of doing this fun challenge. And I want to say that is slated for the end of February. I could be wrong on that. We kind of keep shifting it around because everybody's schedule is a little bit different. So that should be kind of an interesting, ridiculous, fun, creative endeavor to go after with a bunch of people who I really respect as makers. So that should be pretty fun. What else do I have slated for the channel? I want to, with all the talk about the Haunted Mansion reopening um, this week, I kind of wanted to dive back into some of the more Haunted Mansion office kind of stuff, even though I won't be making this space into a Haunted Mansion themed office as I had intended when I first started making those videos a few years back. With the possibility of us moving next year, I didn't want to do anything that I would have to then undo or to make things for a space that may not work in our future space, or honestly, things that we would have to pack and then ship. Um, so I want to kind of get into some of the ephemera of the Haunted Mansion, some of the weird stuff that maybe I'm the only one that's interested in, but it might be a bit of sculpting, it might be a bit of digital fabrication, whether that's 3D printing or laser cutting, um, maybe some 3D scanning. I don't know. I think there's just like a lot of really interesting stuff in the Haunted Mansion that people who really enjoy the Haunted Mansion would appreciate as merchandise that they just don't sell. And so some of that is like the types of stuff that I would love to have for my own collection. And I don't know, I can't remember if I've talked about this in the past or not about how I view collecting. Sorry, we just took like a major hard turn here, but just a glimpse inside of my mind. So as a collector, there's part of me that loves the idea of owning something that was, in a movie or something like that, a screen used prop or whatnot. Or in this case, like, I would love to own something that came from inside the Haunted Mansion that has been a part of the attraction. But as a collector, oftentimes the things that I'm interested in are more inspired by or are um, may not be the actual thing, but trigger that same feeling. So, like, while is not, oops, this guy is not from the park, um, and honestly is not super accurate either. It's something I made in part, um, but when I look at it, it makes me think about the Haunted Mansion in a positive way, and therefore, like, scratches that itch of having that thing. And I like the idea of sort of having more of those types of things. And as a collector, my collection kind of shifts as my interest changes. So I may pick things up and I'll have them in my collection for some time, and then I'll get rid of them so that I can bring in something new. But I was noticing the other day that like my Star Wars collection of things, mainly like helmets and small props, inconsequential props, um, is much larger than my Haunted Mansion collection. And so I think this year I want to try and change that a bit. I don't know where it's all going to go, which may mean that some of the things on this shelf, which you can't see much of it, but some of those things may go on to live lives with other collectors, so that I can make some room for some of my own takes on things from the ride. What else? I don't know. It's interesting. As a as somebody who makes weekly videos, the idea of trying to squeeze something in and edit it and package it in a way that's consumable for people in a week, which is really more like 3 days when it really gets down to it, um, is like an interesting artistic challenge every week. And having been away from it for a couple of weeks, getting back into the swing of things has been difficult, but also it is one of those things like once you kind of get into the rhythm, then it's easy to come up with. But I do sort of want to try and get ahead a little bit more so that I'm not so dependent on um, having the time every week to make a video and get it out to you guys. Um, so I don't know. There's something to be said about having videos in advance versus doing them in real time. And I've tried it before and I've had sort of mixed feelings about it, but I kind of think that like to make this a bit more sustainable long term, it makes more sense to uh, get a couple of projects done at the same time so that I have backups. That way, it never feels like you guys are missing out on a week of videos, um, which I know you guys have been super cool about this for as long as I've been running the channel. It's like if I miss a week, I miss a week, and that's fine. But I kind of feel like, for my own um, satisfaction, I like being able to give you guys a video every week, and I like the challenge of sort of pulling something out of the air and figuring out a way to make it interesting for you guys. Anyways, so we'll see. Maybe maybe I'll get uh, maybe I'll get ahead of schedule. Maybe I won't. Who knows? Sometimes I get ahead of schedule and then I burn through it because something else pops up. Anyhow, so there's that. I think that was all the housekeeping related stuff. Because I was going to do this live stream last week, which actually was going to be like I was going to work on a project that I hadn't intended on making into a video, which now I am making into a video. Um, nope, just lost my train of thought. Time for more coffee. Oh, yes. I remember where I was going with this. I had people submit questions for last week's live stream, which ended up not happening, but I do have them for this week's live stream, and so I'm going to get into them. Actually, I'm going to look through the chat first and see if there's questions here, and then I'll get to the questions that people asked last week. So if you have any questions, like throw them into chat, and I will do my best to get to them. Let's see. Caller Radio wanted to know how I did with my ornament from the ornament project back in December. It did really well. It sold for $400, which is many hundreds of dollars more than I thought it would sell for. Um, and the person who won the auction is very happy with it. So I'm super pleased, and the money went to a great charity organization. So I could not be happier about it. Let's see. For Elena de Howler, Werewolf Queen, I do have an email address. If you go to my website, vanoaksprops.com, there's a contact form there, and and you can send me messages and things from that form. Timothy Young, I understand that dropping ads in the middle of the stream is not great, but also that is how your son makes money. Sorry. I I hate that it's that way, but that is kind of that's the nature of the beast. Did I make the Haunted Mansion candle holder behind me? So this sculpt, I will eventually get this pointing thing down right. This sculpt came from the Replica Prop Forum many years ago, and to my understanding, its lineage comes from a sculpt done either by or by someone in his shop, uh, Greg Nicotero, a special effects makeup artist who many of us know from The Walking Dead. Um, it was a sculpt that either he or someone in his shop did, and then somebody ended up making a mold of it and sold copies of it. And I picked it up many, many, many years ago. Um, and it sat in a box for the longest time because I was trying to figure out how I could add the candlesticks and not have them be battery powered, because the it's a resin casting on the outside, so the shell is resin and the interior structure was expanding foam, and that stuff is the type that was used is very dense. It's very abrasive. So picking away at it with a sharp object really took a long time, and I burned through a couple of pairs of gloves doing it so that I could hollow out the interior to get to the shoulders. And then I realized that the arms are completely solid um, at the shoulder. And so I had to cut the shoulders off and then drilled from the fist down to the elbow and from the shoulder to the elbow so that I could then run um, wiring through it to power the candles. And then I had to figure out reattaching the arms to the torso and blending the seams and all of that. So it was a lot, and it got painted a couple times, and I was never really happy with how it looked. And um, and even now, the ride version, the patina on it is it's runnier. Like you can really see the drips in it. And I've often thought about taking it off of the shelf because it's bolted in, um, and repainting it, but I just never get around to it. Let's see. Is it possible to mist spray paint with a grip handle on the spray can? Um, I can't see why not. Um, Misting spray paint using your fingertip on the nozzle is It's a very light touch, so I would imagine having that same level of control, as you squeeze. I can't see why it wouldn't work, I guess, is the statement that I should make. Um, I've never tried it. I find those, grips good if you're doing a lot of spraying, not so good if you alternate colors all the time just because the fit is so tight on the spray cans. Also, a lot of the spray cans that I use have sort of different shapes, and so it works for some, but not for all. Let's see. Most obscure haunted mansion prop you want to make in the coming year? Hmm. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. Um, I don't know that anything that I'm really interested in making is like terribly obscure. I just think that when it comes to sort of the iconography of that ride, it's not it's not what Disney thinks it is. Like for all the merchandise and stuff that they make, I don't think that the ride really revolves around Madame Leota, um, or the Hitchhiking Ghosts, if I'm being honest. Like I know those are probably the easiest gets, visually, but for me, it's I don't know. The Haunted Mansion is like such a weird animal because what the things that I enjoy about it are so just like not the the things that I think most people relate to the ride. Like the haunted this is going to sound weird, but here we are. One of the main things about the Haunted Mansion that I kind of miss when I is particularly this past year when it's been closed, um, is its smell, which I know sounds strange, but smell is like one of our strongest memory, um, things, and so the fact that I mean, there's no way to really bottle that, but, like, that's kind of where my head is at on a lot of this stuff. Like, if I had my way about it, I would just, like, hang out in the changing portrait gallery where there's, like, the smell and the crazy wood carvings and uh, the rain and lightning in the windows. Like, that to me makes up so much of the ride. It is, it's great immersive theming before people were really talking about immersive theming. Um, yeah, like the stuff that people are really excited about, Hatbox Ghost, sure, it's great to see it, but it's I don't know, so much about what makes the Haunted Mansion good to me is the stuff that is not super high tech, I guess. Okay, so let me pop in and get some of these questions from last week, and then I think I'm gonna get back to work because I'm running behind on a video. So, someone in the YouTube community tab said, "I like the low voltage lighting system you use, but my area is very wet in October. How watertight is it, and do you have ideas on how to make sure it stays watertight?" So the RCA connector versions of the LED spotlights that I made many, many years ago, even here in Southern California, where it does not get particularly wet, although we have had some Octobers where there's been rain, um, those metal connectors will eventually rust. And so every year I pretty much spend, an hour or so going through each connector with a piece of steel wool to try and get off any of the corrosion to make sure that it makes good contact. Um, that said, if you are in a very wet area, There's another video that I made that was an update to that lighting setup that used, um, what is it, IP68 weather resistant connectors that have a screw on cap, and it's got a small rubber washer inside to keep it watertight. That would be my go-to if I were to build the entire thing all over again, which when I made that second video, the intention was that I was going to finally get to the task of tackling that, and I just never did because a video a week. Um, but yeah, if you were going to do that, I would go with weather resistant connectors, which they make for, I want to say, for landscape lighting, which is low voltage, and that would be my solution for that. Somebody else asked, I'm building a pirate display for 2026, and I'm attempting a chandelier prop that will sway back and forth like it's on a ship for the captain's cabin. I was thinking of having a motor pull it one direction and using a spring to pull it back in the other, but I'm having trouble getting it to work properly. Can you think of a better mechanism for this movement? I think for something, if you're going for something subtle, you may not need to have the spring. You could probably just run a motor with some kind of cam or an arm of some kind that would knock into the chain or whatever that's suspending the chandelier. And over time, that repeated motion will create um, the swing. I think it may need help that very first go. That's probably how I would do it. Either that or it's probably a bit more bother than it's worth, but you could just go fishing lines from opposite sides of the room and pull in each direction, but it would require that those things work in concert with each other so that they're not pulling against one another. Let's see. I'm curious about motion sensors to either activate or deactivate lights and or sound. Specifically, I'm thinking of adding this to the ravens that I animated this past year from the motorized model. um, there are. I did a video a couple of weeks ago about adding sound to a tombstone. That little device has a PIR, passive infrared sensor, that can trigger an audio program. You could probably use that same thing to uh, turn on lights. The downside to it would be that you don't have a lot of control over how long those things run for in that particular configuration. If you wanted to get a bit more high tech, you could get into like Arduino, where you could tell it, if this is triggered, run this program for X number of seconds, um, and then shut off, and then pause, and then start again after a certain amount of time. That way, it's not just triggering over and over and over again. Um, and I want to say, for as much as I dislike artificial intelligence um, and how it's impacting the creative industry, uh, Chat GPT does a pretty good job generating Arduino code if you are able to articulate specifically what you want it to do. It requires you to know a little bit about Arduino, generally, like, I want it to do this task on this particular pin because there's a series of pins along the circuit board. Um, but if you can get really specific about what you want it to do, ChatGPT will actually write the code for you in a very short amount of time. Um, So that could be a way to look into doing that. Um, the other thing would be, I know like Fright Props um, sells the like Pico Boos and Pico Volts and those types of prop controllers. And most, if not all of them, have an option for a motion sensor. So that could be a more sort of plug and play approach to adding lights or sound, or both, honestly, with any of those to any prop that you were looking to add lights or sound to. Let's see. Any tips for installing lights into props, specifically line voltage? Ah, that's a tough question to answer without knowing sort of the specifics of what the prop is that you're trying to add lights into. Generally speaking, I don't feel like there's any reason to be using line voltage uh, for putting lights into props. Really, um, there's so many LED options that are 12 volt or 9 volt that you could get away with, and um, that would be my approach to doing it. Yeah, line voltage, particularly in a haunt setting, I just feel like the lower voltage you can have on things, the less likely that things will catch fire and, you know, and whatnot. Because line voltage lights run so much warmer than LEDs do, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that. Um, what is the safest way for a I've never done this before noob to swap a 3 AA battery pack to electrical power for indoor lights? Um, a few years back, I made a video about this exact topic, and um, Amazon sells these little converters that basically change the voltage from line voltage to um, it's an adjustable. I want to say it's from 12 volt to 5 volt. The only issue with those is depending on how far you're dropping that voltage, they can get warm, which is a little concerning. Um, and I'm sure there's better ways to go about it. But in this moment, that's the first thing that popped into my head. So it might be a good place to start and then kind of work out from there. Let's see. What precautions have you taken to avoid copyright or trademark infringements with builds? I don't really have to worry about it so much because um, I'm making these things for myself in most cases. Um, and if I'm selling things to collectors, it's a one off. I feel like most often you get into troubles with trademark and copyright when you are mass producing items. With one off stuff, nobody really cares, and it's not worth the cost to go after anybody for it. Let's see. Okay. So I think that's all the questions that we've got now. Um, unless there's any last minute questions that you guys have, I think we can probably wrap this up. I'm glad to have been doing this from indoors instead of out in the shop where it's 40 something degrees right now, which I know for a lot of places would be a warm day at this time of the year. For Southern California, that's pretty cold. We're just not used to it. Oh, sorry, I didn't see your question, James, the Spirit Halloween fan. I purchased 2 exercise balls to create the abdomen and the head of a spider, and I'm worried the air will escape over time. How could I cover the surface with fur and still re-inflate the spider? Um, That is a good question. I don't know. I think because you want to be able to let the air out, they're always going to need to be pliable in that way, and so unless there's some real reason that these, exercise balls are deflating, you should be alright. I mean, worst case scenario, and this all depends on how long you have your Halloween display up for. If you have to go out and fill them up every so often, it may just be the price of admission to have, like, such a big, prop like that, so could be. Let's see. When is my next Disneyland visit? Very soon. That's all I'll say about that. Let's see. Did I hear something about you moving? Yes, that is correct. Okay. Um, Thanks everybody for coming in and hanging out with me this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. And to everybody who checked in on Mrs. Van Oaks and I. Um, we are fine. Uh, Thankfully, we are no longer in the path of the fire, and the firefighters who've, you know, come from out of state or outside the country to help out have made a lot of progress over the last couple of days since the wind has finally started to die down and they can get a hold of it. Thank you, Emerald Queen, for the super chat. Um, yeah, so we're great. We can finally put our go bags back away and in the closet, um, and I can get back to releasing regular videos. So I will be back next week with a new video. Um, I, in the midst of all of the fire and everything, was commissioned to make some Millennium Falcon inspired wall panels for someone who is turning a room into a Star Wars themed room, and and so I'm building those for him and taking you guys along with me as I kind of fumble my way through making a video, having not made one for a few weeks. Uh, I do not have a coffee account. I think I set one up, but I have never checked in on it. That said, if you wanted to support these videos and the things that I do, head over to patreon.com/VanOaksProps, or you can go to my website, vanoaksprops.com, and in the top navigation, you'll see a link for Patreon. Um, or you can visit my shop and buy a piece of merch, hats, t-shirts, stickers, other things. And all of that helps me to continue making videos like this for you guys. Um, yeah, I think that's everything. I'm so rusty. I'm sorry, you guys. This is terrible. Um, yeah, I will see you guys next week with a new video, and and hopefully the air will get better, and I can stop wearing a respirator and having everything take twice as long. All right, I'll see you guys. Be safe. Have a great weekend, and of course, go make something.